All right, look, House of the Dragon Season 2 just ended, and the Game of Thrones people in your life are probably sounding off on the way this show just left us hanging. So today on the podcast, the group chat's here. They're gonna let their feelings be known about how things fell into place and whether the finale delivered or let the house burn down. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, listen, if you're a fan of HBO's Game of Thrones, there's a good chance you've been watching its prequel, House of the Dragon. The new series takes place 200 years in the past, and it's been focusing on the Targaryen bloodline, okay? And they're fighting over love and lust and dragons, and of course, the throne.
There is no war so hateful as a war between kin.
I mean to fight this war and win it.
I will not be thought weak. I wish to spill blood.
And no war so bloody as a war between dragons.
So that's a bit of the trailer for House of the Dragon Season 2. The big finale drops Sunday. Sean T. Collins and Alison Herman, they're here. They watch it. They're going to give us their thoughts. And just a heads up, there will be spoilers. Sean, Alison, welcome to Commotion.
Thanks
so much for having us. Yeah.
Well, listen, I got to give you kind of an FYI. I am a total kind of Game of Thrones noob. I didn't actually watch the original series, kind of caught bits and pieces of it glancingly. I came into House of Dragon Season 2 kind of cold, and, the previously on bits did a lot of the heavy lifting here. But, with that in mind, Sean, I'm going to start with you. What did you make of the big finale?
Well, call me old-fashioned, but I'm the kind of person who thinks that when a season of a television show builds to a big epic battle, it should show the big epic battle. And so for the second time this year, first with Shogun and now with House of the Dragon, I wound up being kind of disappointed by the end. But I understand why they made the decision that they made. Even a show like House of the Dragon has a limited budget of money and time, and doing all those effects-intensive dragon sequences costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time. So they had a shorter season than they had the first time around. I'd imagine that changed the rhythm around a bit. It's not maybe how I would have emphasized things towards the end, but I thought that as an episode, it was so effective at building that tension. It was almost like a victim of its own success. Like if I hadn't been so invested in all those fights happening, I wouldn't have felt so disappointed. So in that way, it worked.
Interesting. Well, listen, like Alison, this is a season that had some banger cliffhangers, like throughout this season. So it is kind of interesting that the finale ended the way it did. And, we're seeing a lot of like the frustrated responses like Sean's. Like, I mean, I saw someone write that or like somewhere that this was the most frustrating fade to black since The Sopranos, which, by the way, I love Sopranos, so I don't know where they're going with that. But, what did you make of the finale, Alison?
I'm certainly one of the finale's defenders, I would say. I do agree. It's objectively anticlimactic, especially by the standards of Game of Thrones, which is a show and a franchise that has really trained us to expect big battles, big deaths, not being afraid to kill off major characters. And in fact, House of the Dragon, unlike Game of Thrones, is based on a completed story. So people who go in with the book knowledge go in knowing that the big battles are coming and specific deaths are coming. I actually think the show has sort of used that to its advantage. I think the show is best when it is forcing you to just sit in the stomach sinking inevitability of this awful, unproductive war that isn't going to help anyone. And in fact, is going to significantly weaken Westeros's position against the threat that we know is coming in Game of Thrones. And so with the finale, I actually sort of appreciated that it invested its time and resources into the smaller interpersonal dramas and tensions and relationships rather than the big CGI battles that I honestly tend to find less satisfying than those one-on-one moments throughout both House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones.
I'm actually kind of leaning in that direction too. Like I personally love the finale. I love like these exchanges between the two women characters played by Emma Darcy and Olivia Cooke. Like they're the ones that just kept me coming back, right? But I mean, Sean, this is a show that in a way lives up to its title in the sense that it really was all about the dragons this year, right? So I'd love to know, like, what did you think about the role that dragons played in this season?
Well, just as a fantasy nerd and someone who's familiar with the history of the genre on the screen, I was really impressed. There has never been an attempt to show this many dragons at this level of detail for this amount of screen time in broad daylight, fighting each other, doing things. There really was not a lot for them to base this off of. Even in the original Game of Thrones, you didn't have a lot of action like that overall. So I thought that was impressive. But meanwhile, at the same time, these dragons have to have character, personality, because they're all individuated. They are linked to different riders there's some sort of like dog owners, kind of dogs and their owners have the same personality, a little bit of that going on. So, and simultaneously, they also have to represent nuclear war. They're this living metaphor for the destructive capability of war and what human beings are capable of doing to one another when war is unleashed. So they had to thread a lot of needles with those dragons, and I think they did it very well.
Yeah, well, so Alison, I mean, what did you make of kind of the role that dragons are playing this season?
I thought they overall did a really good job of using the dragons as an accent to and to draw out the human personalities. I think everything Sean said in terms of how much they illustrated the dragons and their personalities is totally true. But on the other hand, I really liked the way they kind of used the dragons to tell stories about Rhaena, the Targaryen or the Valerian/Targaryen princess who's always felt bereft because she's alone among her family of not having a dragon, or Jacaerys, the heir to Rhaenyra, who's always felt validated despite somewhat obviously being an illicit child because he has a dragon and he feels dispossessed by these more common folk getting their own dragons in the most recent string of episodes. So I think the show both does a really impressive job in showing the dragons in terms of special effects, but I think understands that first and foremost, this is a show about people, and the dragons exist to highlight and underscore and advance the interactions between the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you may not. I'm sorry, but you may not see the dragons fight too much in the finale, but you see how they affect basically every single major character has been changed by their proximity to these animals and what they can do. So it's exactly like Alison says. Like, the dragons are great in and of themselves, but they really exist to further the human drama.
Yeah. Well, like, I mean, speaking of kind of major characters and stuff, and I mean, even Alison, when you were just talking there and you were name dropping people, and I was just like doing the mental calculations again, like, who are those people again? But, like, from the little bit of a Game of Thrones that I did see, I could tell like that show was just brimming with characters. Like, there were so many principal characters. It was ridiculous, right? And so, House of the Dragon, it's not like that. It's much more streamlined in the sense that it's focusing on the Targaryens. Sean, that more focused, streamlined approach, how do you think that does that work in this show's favor?
I do. In its favor, it's hard to say, because I like both House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones quite a bit. But I would say that Game of Thrones is probably a little bit more bombastic and pulpy overall in its approach. Now, I realize that House of the Dragon is a show that has shown multiple decapitations on screen, so it's a little weird to say it's less pulpy than the other one. But it's true. Like, I think when you watch House of the Dragon, it gets back to what Alison has been saying about those human interactions, and what you've been saying. Those scenes between Alicent and Rhaenyra are really the juice of this show. And so it's a little bit less like Braveheart and more like The Crown, I think, overall, like if you're trying to get the vibe right. And I think it shows that you can tell stories basically about the same thing, but with a different tone and a different like point of emphasis in this overall setting, which is probably important for the franchise moving forward.
Do you agree with that, Alison?
I do, although I do think that season 2 of the show has sort of shifted a bit in focus, in that season 1 was very much this almost claustrophobic chamber drama where you were almost entirely in King's Landing, the capital. All the drama was almost entirely within a single family, per the name of the show. And in season 2, the very first shot of the season is of Winterfell. And I think the message that the makers of the show were sending is that season 2 was about broadening the board, introducing more characters, introducing more locations, but most importantly, in terms of the themes and the storytelling, demonstrating the effects of this war on everyone else in the Seven Kingdoms and even across the ocean in the finale. And just saying, because this family has dragons, because they have all this political power, their actions spill over to everyone else, from commoners living in the capital to houses thousands of miles away that have their own internal disputes that are being magnified by this war. And I really liked the way season 2 kind of expanded its purview while keeping you rooted in the Targaryens, but really communicating the broader stakes and scale of this conflict.
Yeah. When you talk about the stakes of the scale of the conflict, I mean, your review, Alison, in Variety, you mentioned something about how, because we kind of already know where this all leads in the grand scheme of things, that's why some of these battle sequences don't exactly matter, and it's these little intimate character moments, I think, that feel bigger, and was the focus there. I mean, can you expand on that a bit, in terms of why it worked out this season the way it did?
Sure. I think House of the Dragon, unlike Game of Thrones, actually is really a show about history and feeling the weight of history, feeling the cyclical pull of history, what gets lost to history. And I think it's sort of a way of working around the prequel problem, which is we know what happens next. We know where all of this is going. And I think the very best prequels, Better Call Saul, use that sense of inevitability to underscore the tragedy. And it's why I think the sort of defining emotion you're supposed to get from the show is dread and sadness. And something I wrote in my initial review that I think holds up in the end is that I actually found this season of House of the Dragon in a way sort of darker than anything in Game of Thrones. Because Game of Thrones in the long view is about eventually everyone coming together to fight a common threat and people deciding to break the wheel and install a new ruler who will hopefully set a better precedent. And House of the Dragon is about how a happy, peaceful, and functioning realm descends into chaos, and you can't really blame it on any one person or any one action, and everyone just feels sort of swept up in this tide. And I found that very effective, even as, I think some people found it a little more frustrating or hard to sit with than some of the big bombastic battle sequences towards the end of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I agree. And Sean, I mean, look, this finale ended with all different characters marching towards battle with their different aims and their different allegiances. Talk to me about whether you come out of this rooting for anyone in particular.
I do, and I'm quite surprised by who I was rooting for, because it's very different than the approach taken by George R.R. Martin in Fire and Blood, the source book. I was really rooting for the queens, Alison and Rhaenyra, because I think of all the characters who are left alive on the show, at any rate, they're the two who most clearly see the stakes and the danger of what they're involved in. Now, they both have a lot of faults, and they both played a pretty large role in getting the Seven Kingdoms to the point that they're at. But, you see it in the finale with the scene, which is an invention of the show, by the way. It's not in the book. Just as the scene where Rhaenyra went to visit Alison earlier in the season was also an invention of the show. Alison comes to see Rhaenyra, despite all the danger, and desperately tries to broker a peace that she knows will cost her son, it will cost her family, basically everything. But that's preferable to her than having more blood on her hands. And Rhaenyra more or less agrees. And in the books, they're basically both ruthless power players. So to see this humanity in the face of all that inhumanity, really, I don't know how people decide that they're Team Black and Team Green. To me, it's all the same team. There's people who want mass murder and there's people who don't. And I'm on the second group side for sure.
All right. So, Alison, I want to hear your take, but we only got 30 seconds to go. So let me know where you're standing.
I totally agree with everything Sean said. And I think this is something House of the Dragon has in common with Game of Thrones and George R.R. Martin's writing. They do an amazing job of instilling understanding and empathy with every character. Every character who you find instinctively sympathetic has flaws. Every character who you might find antagonistic has something that explains their psychology or at least makes them interesting. And I think it's very impressive the show has been able to do that without the thousands and thousands of pages of source material and character point of view that Game of Thrones had working in its favor.
I love that. You guys are convincing me to actually go back and watch Game of Thrones, which is something that miraculously nobody has ever been able to do in the last decade or so. The show has been going on. So thank you both for being here and walking me through this.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Alison Herman is a TV critic at Variety, and Sean T. Collins is a freelance culture critic and co-host of the Boiled Leather Audio Hour podcast, which covers all things from the original Game of Thrones universe. Both seasons of House of the Dragon in their entirety are now available on Crave. All I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. So we're going to pivot from the biggest show on TV to an indie movie that's stirring up a lot of conversation.
You're Asian. Does that mean your husband is white?
What? My husband, Asian.
How are you half Asian?
Yeah, you said that.
She's probably just forgetting. Mom, no. Just get out right now,
Hey,
Mom. Just get out, Mom. Get out, Mom. Get out. Sorry. I'm sorry you had to see that. It's just she could just be like super annoying sometimes, and
dude, don't talk to your mom like that.
she wasn't even being annoying. Like, what were you even doing?
Man, this kid's kind of whack.
It's a very awkward moment from Didi, which is the feature-length debut from Oscar-nominated filmmaker Sean Wang, who is drawing from his own experiences to give us his spin on the classic coming-of-age story. Didi has already won an audience award when it premiered back at Sundance, as well as a special jury award for its cast, and it's been getting rave reviews in the run-up to its wide release this Friday. Rachel Ho is here to talk about it. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Rad.
Hey, so look, I saw this movie, but because I'm in the host chair, you get to do the plot summary. So tell our audiences what Didi's all about.
So we've got another coming of age story. I say another, but it's an important one, and it's about a 13-year-old boy, Taiwanese American, growing up in California. His name's Chris. He's a bit of a punk. He's going through some stuff. It's a rough time for him right now, and it's just about how he's kind of navigating this time in his life. And a lot of family dynamics with his mother, as you heard there, his grandmother, his older sister, who's about to go away to college as well. So, yeah, it's all the hallmarks of the coming of age, but done really well.
Well, I mean, talk to me about, of course, Sean Wang says he's lifted from his own life. What do we know about Sean Wang?
I mean, he's really new. Like you said, he's Oscar nominated. His his documentary short got nominated for the Oscars this year. He's worked with the Sundance Lab quite often, actually. So it's like he's very tied to that festival, it seems. And this is his directorial debut. So it's really exciting. And he's from California. His family's from Taiwan. Like it's very autobiographical, this one.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just add that like the short film that he was nominated for at the last Oscars is called 99 Waipo. It's available on Disney Plus. It's a short film about his actual grandmothers, who one of them appears in this movie, right? So, and look, like Rachel, you mentioned before, like, you know, you kind of suggested, there's lots of coming of age stories. I mean, it is kind of a ritual for kind of newbie filmmakers to draw from their own lives, make a coming of age film, get it Sundance certified, premiere at a film festival, and announce themselves as a filmmaker. It's like the coming of age story they tell is also a coming of age for them as a filmmaker. And, you know, you've seen this from like, say, Greta Gerwig in Lady Bird and Bo Burnham in 8th grade. And, you know, on the less talented side of things, Jonah Hill in mid-90s, you know, like it goes on and on. But what is it about Didi that makes it stand out?
I think, to say that it's because it's about an Asian kid. I mean, even that, we've got Minari in Canada, we had Rice Boy Sleeps. Like, it's not necessarily unique, but I think for me, what made it stand out the most was that it really shows a kid not just having a hard time, but an Asian kid who is acting out in a way that I think a lot of people don't expect Asian kids to act out, but everyone's got their moments. So for me, that's what really came through. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that it is based on Sean's life and it feels really authentic in that way. And there's some tremendous performances in it as well. Not to say other coming of age films don't have that, but I do think that it's one of those films that it will stand up for a very long time. And it's giving another audience demographic, you know, an outlet to see themselves on film, which, you know, for me, for you, we didn't really have that growing up.
No. Well, I mean, look, the film, talking about what we had growing up, I mean, the film's set in 2008, right? Now, you know, and the fact that, you know, it makes me look back at that era nostalgically makes me feel terribly old. But on top of that, but talk to me about, like, how did that, do you think that setting the story back then, do you think it added to the story, took away from the story? How do you feel about that?
I think it adds to it. Again, it's about authenticity, right? That's when Sean came of age. So that's when he sets it in. And it's an interesting time, too, now that we look back on it, because it isn't the 90s where there's absolutely no technology, that you're outside playing all the time. We're at the precipice in 2008 of YouTube is a thing now, like recording videos and posting them online, having online social media like the MySpace, the Friendster, that kind of thing. It's all just beginning. And I feel like it really it's like a good snapshot of time that it's on neither here nor there in a way. And I think that it really adds a lot of like texture and a lot of character to the film that maybe you don't get when you're all the way no technology, or today all the way text on the screen kind of thing,
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, like, I remember when this premiered at Sundance. I wasn't there. I didn't see it at Sundance, but I remember the raves pouring in as soon as it premiered. I think it was pretty unanimously in favor of the film for the first leg of the festival. But I understand you had a different reaction to the movie.
I hated it so much the first time I watched it. I have to admit, the first time I watched it, I went, God, I really don't like this movie. And I couldn't put my finger on why. Like, it's not that it was poorly done. I think it's a very well-made movie. Like I said, the performances are absolutely amazing, but it sat with me in such a negative way. I didn't want to watch it again. I was like, I'm happy for Sean. Good for him. Good for this Asian kid doing his thing. I just couldn't stand it. And I think the reason why, now that, a few months have passed, I think it's because it taps into something that maybe we're a little uncomfortable with, especially as we're a little bit older, of saying, projecting our own times that we weren't so kind to our parents maybe, and weren't so kind to our mothers in particular, and we're a little bit rude to them. And I think that it just kind of flashed back at me, and it made me a little uncomfortable to sit with, oh, maybe I wasn't the perfect kid that I thought I was when I was growing up. We have those moments. But now, again, with those months in between, like that kind of enriches the movie for me. The fact that it made me feel like it was such a visceral experience that I really didn't like it. He's such an unlikable character, Chris. He's really a punk. Like, he's such a bratty little child. But we all had that moment. Not to say that's how we all were 24 hours a day, but like we all had those moments. So I think it was more of me just projecting my own insecurities about how I was as a child onto the film. But now that I have got some space, I do think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely just an astounding feature.
No, I mean, like, I think making Chris so unlikable is actually what made the movie stand out for me. And I mean, emotionally, it's like, I think this movie was interesting that it challenges us to try and like Chris in the same way that it's the stories about him being challenged to like himself. I mean, it is very much about a kid growing up with self-hate and depression and projecting that outward. So that's really what worked for me. That really what felt authentic to me. Is there something else that jumped out at you in terms of, what rang truest in terms of this film, and what rang especially authentic?
I didn't personally go through this, but that idea of saying like, oh, I'm half white. I'm not, kind of having to want to push against this idea of being Asian in a very predominantly white community, that I can very much commiserate with. And having that struggle of your identity, of the fact that, your family doesn't eat the same food as Betty down the street. Your lunches look a little bit strange. Your parents don't speak English all the time. That to me was something that it really struck a nerve. And I think it strikes a nerve not just for Asian kids, but any immigrant child, any, born from immigrants. It's something that we all go through. And I think that we don't realize we're all going through it at the time because we don't talk about it to one another. And it's only until we get older, we're like, oh, so we all had the same childhood. We all felt the same way. We all didn't like it. But so for me, that's what I think stuck out the most to me in terms of Chris being such a little brat.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, Rachel, we only got about 30 seconds here, but I do need to talk about Joan Chen in this movie. She plays the mother, and of course, Joan Chen's pretty iconic, being in someone, she was in what's it called, Twin Peaks, The Last Emperor. I was going to say Last Supper, but she's been in a lot of iconic movies. What does it mean for someone like her to be appearing in a movie like this?
It's lovely. I mean, I think she's put together a really great career throughout her whole, she's been working for like 30, 40 years now in China and in America. I think she's done a tremendous job. But if you talk to her, it sounds to be like she's kind of like, I really hope this like opens some doors for me. And I'm like, well, that's such a telling thing of someone of her stature who feels like she hasn't gotten the opportunities to shine in the way she wants to shine in Hollywood. So who knows? Maybe this will be like a second, third career stop for her, because she's absolutely tremendous. And I feel like we're going to hear her name a little bit during award season.
I feel so too. I mean, this is, if it follows the trajectory of all those other like Ladybirds and stuff, we know we'll see it during award season.
Yeah.
But so Rachel, thank you so much for being here and helping me.
Thanks, Rad.
Thank you. Rachel Ho is the film editor for Exclaim. Didi is playing in select cities right now before getting a wide release this Friday. And that's it for the podcast today. Hey, can you do me a favor? While you're listening to this podcast, don't forget to follow us. You can connect to us on Instagram. We're at CommotionCBC. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud, and I'll be back here tomorrow. Have a good one.